engaging people that will take on those leadership roles is crucial to, so it's nice to talk about that, but there has to be actually a concrete organizing plan for the leadership.
Great point. So one other thing, there are trainings, Vermont Emergency Management trainings for the folks who are going to be in charge of this in the city. And there's like an operations center that crops up in emergency, right? So there are all these components that are sort of known and done. There's trainings we're hooking folks up with, and then you practice it, right? You practice it, you see how it works, and part of that we've heard early in our research of the CAN network is just what you said. It's hard to sustain it in between emergencies. And so, that's the question is, how do you find those leaders? How do you keep the CAN network simmering in between times of emergency? So I see some other hands. I also would love to ask you all that question of what would have worked better for you, right? Like this is the sort of moment of brainstorm of, and do you have experience with the CAN network? What are your ideas that might make a CAN network, just so everyone's on the same page? That's this local neighborhood leadership, right? It's like, you have your designated neighborhood, you have a leader, you know what everybody needs, you know who got flooded, you know who needs a supply, right? It's sort of like this first pass alert and then support neighborhood by neighborhood, which we have had experience, as it was just alluded to, in Montpelier.
But I'm the CAN leader.
There you go.
I know.
What keeps you motivated?
So I think the CAN neighborhood started up, so I live up off Deerfield, off Terrace. So, hi, everyone who lives there. What are we? Park West?
Park West.
Park West. I always get all the Montpelier Park West neighborhood. And so we had, what worked really well for us was getting fed information so that we could feed it out. And so we created mechanisms of communication through, we have a Facebook page, but then a lot of folks were like, well, I don't use Facebook. So we did a listserv. So we collected everyone's emails. And then we got down to the lower level, which is just going to talk to your neighbors. So I know almost, I would say 80% of my neighbors, just talking to them and understanding what their needs are. And, we did that when there wasn't an emergency, right? So it's building that foundation and that relationship and taking the time and effort to understand your neighbors. And then we had a little, a board. I don't remember. We had those
Oh, right. We had the
like a sandwich board.
The sandwich boards for neighborhood.
And so that was another way of communication. So as soon as you pulled a neighborhood, we posted flyers and information. So as people walked by, if they didn't, have email or Facebook or they didn't want to come out and talk to you, it was more of a passive way to communicate information. So I personally like the CAN network. I think it was a great way to bring the neighborhood together and inform people. That was not activated during the flood at all because we were not given any information to pass along to our neighbors. So I think that was a break. That's an opportunity for improvement.
There's no longer any city support for it, so
okay.
Well,
even if the structure exists, and so how do we continue to build that and think of a way to enhance it? And I think it was just information that we needed to pass along. So I think there's just an opportunity to improve.
Before you ask your question,
yeah.
I want to and I know you have a question too.
So first of all, thank you for doing that. I think that there are some elements of it that still live. So one component of all of this is either reviving, reinventing, reinvigorating, whatever, the existing and old network, and then sort of improving upon that existing structure. And that is one of the sort of alert methods that will go in conjunction with what the city is doing or what any other volunteer networks will be doing. There were so many things that happened this July that were, a lot of them were initiated by the city, and then the city didn't sort of stand up and take credit for those things. So there were a lot of things that the city was doing. For example, setting up the hub, tasking the Parks Department and Montpelier Alive to sort of run that thing was an effort of the city. And a lot of things happened because we got lucky. We had some of the right people in the right places at the right time, and they just made it work. So part of the work that we're doing is figuring out who is aware of the CAN network, who was part of the volunteer hub, what did the city do, what did individual businesses do that did or didn't work, and then trying to piece all those things together into the toolkits that we were talking about and bring all that together into one larger, more robust plan.
Yes.
sorry, before we go there, I think
I just have
Adrian
one
did
more
have a
really quick
question.
thing.
and
I
we'll
think,
cut
I
you
don't
off.
know if it's part of your plan, I hope it is, but one of the things that was missing during the response was an opportunity for improvement, was including the public health department. So the state public health department, I work in public health, that's my background, and in the world of epidemiologists, they have emergency response plans to respond to these emergencies, and that is what they do for a living. And it was lacking in terms of our PPE, our public health response, our safety for our citizens, so they don't get sick. They did get sick. It wasn't necessarily reported through the health department or through the hospitals, but it was an unintended consequence that could have been prevented, and I hope it's gonna be part of this plan,
Thank you very much.
so.
What does CAN stand for and what is that?
So is it
Community Action
Community
Network.
Action
Capital
Network?
Well, that's
area.
actually
Capital area.
originally capital area
And the community
neighborhoods.
Oh, capital area neighborhoods, there you go. So much to learn.
Okay, Julio,
I'm a
thank you.
community.
But look, that goes back to the '09 great financial crash, when there was a lot of worry about
Would you like to come and
seniors, et
sit
cetera,
here?
not having services support. So it was a way of trying to organize the neighborhoods to check in on people who might be having financial difficulties.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to, and Adrian brought this up as well, that not everybody communicates or receives information in the same way.
They do not.
And so while the city was putting out messages and Montpelier Live was putting out messages, there are folks that just don't receive messages in that way. So we have to sort of diversify the way that messages get out, even if it's your next door neighbors knocking on Miss McGillicuddy's door to saying, what do you need? Here's some water, and this is what's happening, right?
And that's the beauty of this, right? I think our whole concept here is Montpelier is small enough, we're large, but we're small enough, that what Adrian just described as your experiences in the, CAN leader is, you know exactly everyone in your neighborhood and what they need and how they get information, be it a knock on the door or social media or an email. And the only way to do that is at that level of granularity. It layers. So that's like the surefire way that everyone in that neighborhood is getting communicated to. And then there's like layers from there up to the city and then the state. And great point about the public health.
And Dan and Adrian, I hope you'll welcome a call when we get to that and we reach out to you and say, what
Yeah.
experience and knowledge can you help share with us?
We still use that structure in our neighborhood all the time, so.
And by the way, I do have the database of the original leadership. So
Thank you, that'll be
Fantastic.
super useful, yes.
So, Tori.
I wanted, I want to also make a pitch for having social services and mental health be part of any planning for emergency response. I'm still in my therapy practice, I'm still, obviously still, it isn't that long, I'm still supporting people and picking up the pieces of their traumatic reactions to the flood, and I'm sure that's true for any therapist in the area. I would love for there to have been and for there to be kind of a structure to mobilize a much more organized response. There's a group of trauma therapists from the Burlington area who I know were reaching out down here and kind of trying to send, essentially sending therapy missionaries.
Sure, I just quickly wanted to make a pitch too, this is, I feel like excellent feedback and it's exactly right? And the goals of this kind of group coming out of it are things like that comprehensive response plan, right, that is actionable for businesses, individuals in the city, right? The neighborhood network that helps with that neighbor-to-neighbor assistance. But also like this thing that Suzanne is really leading of this long-term recovery group. I just want to talk really quickly what that is. We've seen incredible response to support businesses, right, and the municipality, but really to be frank, I think the original narrative coming out of the flood was our downtown businesses are devastated, and in Barrie it's all residential, right? And in fact, it's a much more complicated narrative, right? 400 individual households or individuals applied for FEMA assistance, right? And so across the state, this is not like Montpelier inventing something new. There's systems with the Agency of Human Services. Leah's a representative from Capstone who's working on part of this to really set up, you've got, if your house gets devastated, you've got insurance, you've got FEMA, you've got the state fund of last resort, and then you have your neighbors. And you're never going to be made whole, right? And so this final gap is the work of this long-term recovery group. And it's not just its financial resources, but it's labor, it's materials, it's support, emotional support, all of those things. And so I would just really encourage you folks as you're kind of like spreading the word about the work that this commission's doing, there's an opportunity for everybody to engage right now in this long-term recovery group. We need more members in it, and we need additional energy.
So I want to give space for anyone who wants to get up and move to Watershed or Adaptive Downtown. Thank you so much. This is exactly the type of conversation we're looking at. And this is not the end. That's an opportunity to.
Nice to meet you. Judy Walk is my name.
Eric Norton.
Take a seat.
I was only available to see when I got in.
I'm gonna ride. Apt pupil.
I don't usually sit right to the front.
Sure,
I'm
sure.
middle of the class.
Where's the Great Super Bowl.
There you go.
Whoa.
Yeah, for one that I didn't.
Thanks a
really-
lot, appreciate it.
For one that I really didn't care about the infrastructure, it was like.
That'd be great, right?
Sorry.
Oh, I know we missed you. I know. That was good. Hi, everyone. We're just gonna give another minute for people to turn over here. Thanks for those who stayed, and we'll get more into it. So, anyone coming this way, you think? Anyone coming? We'll give it a minute.
Maybe a couple more on the way.
Great. We'll get started and we'll let people join as they come. Hi to the newcomers and thanks for those who were part of our last round. We actually just had a great feedback session, which is exactly what we're looking for. So just another recap. This is the emergency response and preparedness. How can we be prepared in light of the next one, be it flood or whatever it might be. And we just had some amazing conversation around the community action networks, local sort of neighborhood alert systems. Some people have had experience actually currently being on those, and some gaps and great feedback that was identified. And we have Suzanne here as well as a resource to talk about long-term recovery. So I'm just going to open it up to folks because we just had a really robust, and I could tell there was more ideas percolating that we didn't even get to. So yes.
I would just like to talk about long-term recovery.
Great.
And I don't have my prop with me tonight. I wish I did. It's a tape measure. But the tape measure goes up to here, okay? That's how high the water was in my house on Lower State Street. Okay, we are still not in our houses. We were put through the meat grinder at your expense. Hey.
I really appreciate you sharing that, and it exposes so much of the complexities and the human element.
So if anybody wants to contact me, get any kind of information, you're never going to be whole. Never. And flood insurance is not good.
Yeah, exactly.
Flood insurance will pay for maybe a third of your total damage. So if you're ever flooded, you're never going to be whole.
Really cannot thank you enough for sharing that because we need to hear this exact story. And that's why we have a long-term recovery group, but as you're
I
saying.
mean, we're nowhere. We're 8 months in and we're nowhere.
Yep.
Some of us are ready to move a little bit, but we're told we can't move. All right, so this country has had so many natural disasters. It should be a seamless process. You're assigned people that work with you through the whole process.
Yeah.
I was on the phone yesterday for 4 hours with SBA because their portal to send them information wasn't working. This is the nutty stuff that happens that just wants, you just want to bang your head against the wall.
Exactly. Thank you. I'm so sorry you're going through that, and your experience does help because really, as someone said earlier, over 400, so 7 homes, as you just mentioned, substantially damaged, over 400 homes affected, and I kind of think that's not really well known, by your neighbors.
I
So,
mean, I'm staying in Barry, and the situation in Barry is just horrible. Horrible, horrible, horrible. It stunk so bad for weeks after the flood. I mean, those poor people. mean, I feel lucky compared to
Yeah.
a lot of people.
We are collaborating with Barry in some ways, and we hope to deepen that collaboration. We really want to use this to sort of make it better the next time.
So I'm a good resource on
Thank
how
you,
to
Ed.
navigate.
Really appreciate it. And you mentioned layers of maddening bureaucracy is part of your
Oh.
thing as well. And that's some of what we're trying to investigate. We just got off a call with folks from the Department of Financial Regulation who are doing some research on other tools in addition to flood insurance, because there's this acknowledgement that they don't make you whole. And what does that look like? Could that be, you know, for the city to buy, for the city to be umbrella, for residents, right? So I think there is an acknowledgement of what you're saying and trying to support.
So what happens is every time you go a little step, you get a new person.
Yeah.
So you start over
Oh.
from the beginning and
Yeah.
you tell your, I have my story memorized to
Right.
every word and every
Nice.
inflection in my speech about it. And it happens all the time.
Well, I appreciate you being here and being willing to say it yet again to us, because it does matter.
I'm
Thank
lucky
you.
I can still laugh, but.
Thank you. Thank you. Kate.
Hi, my name's Kate McCarthy. I'm really encouraged to hear of these conversations with the Department of Financial Regulation, because I have an idea rattling around in my head that has to do with better ways to help people get resources after the flood. You know, maybe it's a formal insurance program, but we've also seen an outpouring in this community, and we know people who weren't affected who want to help, people who were affected who want to help, people who have flood insurance might not like to put their money toward that again. What might we do with that energy and those resources? And I wonder if there's some sort of community-driven, grassroots, mutual aid style, local insurance product that would be legal to create. And that would give people some sense of assurance that there's gonna be something there for them. And it's gonna be less traumatizing to access it than other more conventional resources. So this is an idea that I've made up, but I'm really glad.
Mutual,
Yeah.
like insurance tool. Great, it's on the list, it's on the list, and we will take the seed of your idea and see what's there. See if it can grow. I love that. Thank you very much, Kate. This is how I cope with this is, what are their ideas? How can we move forward? How can we sort of keep moving, right? Which is my own personal coping mechanism in the light of disaster. Yes, hi.
Hi, I'm Catherine Provo, and I just want to tell a tiny bit of our story, because I don't know if it's been brought up or not.
Great.
We live up by Vermont College.
Yeah.
And the groundwater.
Yeah.
Seeped into the basement. We had a sump pump in the wrong spot. My husband and I stayed awake 38 straight hours with 2 shop vacs. We were thrilled, lucky, came out way, way, way better than everybody else. But in terms of preparedness and adaptiveness, I haven't heard anyone mention.
And had exactly the same 36 hours that you did, and it was shocking, you know, because we were not expecting that at all. And I think what you're saying is part of this general alertness of, we are living in a different world now. It is a wetter world, it will always be wetter, and we can need to be adaptive in all these ways. And maybe there, and again, like lots of talk about like lifting up utilities, and is there ways that we can all do that together? And this idea of maybe all of Montpelier can be privy to these conversations, because they might be strategies we all want.
And it doesn't have to be necessarily located by a stream, a river, a lake. It can be groundwater driven in terms of preparedness and
Yes.
setback.
Exactly. Thank you.
For the people on the hills, I'd be worried about a landslide,
Yeah.
which would be pretty much deadly.
Right.
Yes.
No, go ahead. I'll pass for the moment.
Oh, I don't think anyone else has a comment.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say, first of all, that I had a somewhat similar experience also at a higher elevation. My sump pump kept up, I was very lucky, but I'm 100% with you that nobody is completely, safe.
Well, and and the thing was, I mean, we're sitting there thinking, what about our neighbors? Because 3 of the 4 neighbors were all gone. We couldn't even go check on their houses or anything. So when you think about preparedness, that's great, but if you're holding on your own floor, you can't really go out and even help anybody else.
Yes.
So,
That's a very good point, by the way, and we can maybe get into that again with this group. The previous group, we did talk a lot about the idea of this community neighborhood action, which is a way to be connected with those neighbors as that first line of defense, sharing resources, calling, saying, can I go into your basement, check out on your, utility, whatever it is. So this is what we're very excited about, is we just feel like we've got the momentum in this small enough, ready enough community that we can do that layer, that level of granularity that might support what you're saying, at least for neighbor to neighbor. Please go ahead.
And then I was also just gonna circle back to what people were saying about public health, and I also work in public health for the Vermont Department of Health, so maybe we can talk a little more later
Absolutely.
about how we can collaborate.
Would love to. And back to sort of the idea of this local emergency operations plan. The idea is you build the infrastructure and you build the relationships, including with the state folks, public health, right? Like all the different levels when you're not in an emergency, so that when the emergency strikes, those relationships are there, you know who to call, you know who's the authority. We've heard this so much, and I think we'll still hear it. Who is the authority to say yes or no? And there was confusion, and that's why there was not yes, this is the declaration of what to do with PPE or with mucking out or whatever that is. So I think we're really focused on that as we create the plan, as we help create the plan.
Can I build off of that?
Go, Barry, please.
So during the emergency, I worked for the state, and so we were in HF Commerce, and so we were finding ourselves in the same kind of position, like who's responsible for responding to the businesses or responding to, so we kind of made up the playbook a bit as we were going. I mean, the state does a really good job in terms of its emergency responsiveness to saving lives and clearing roads and the things that have to happen first. But that plan, for the 48 hours after, how do we support the businesses and the property owners with consistent information, and to get through kind of now, unfortunately, there's a lot of experts in town, but having that roadmap of not just, locally here's our roles, Katie and Alec were kind of making up, all of a sudden they're assigned, you're in charge of businesses, you're in charge of residents,
exactly.
Having that the plan in place, and what's the role of the Chamber of Commerce, or what's the role of these other entities regionally or statewide. So, whether it's me or, somebody else in that position assigned at different agencies, it would be helpful for all of us to know.
Yeah, I love it. And that's exactly the vision, Gary, is very clear expectations now with enough time to actually practice. I mean, that's the thing that's beautiful, that they have trainings and they actually do practice exercises, everything from a sort of more of a intellectual tabletop of who's on first, this happens, who do you call, and who's in your, speed dial, to actually practicing a full activity of, this disaster happens, what do you do? So having that established, and then even working it a little bit to make sure, and you're right, the city, the state, businesses, volunteers, this is what we've heard from a lot of people too, of just who is in charge?
I can practice it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Carly. We also have to be thinking about the technology we have and the technology we're going to have available to us, because rainstorms of that intensity usually come with wind, and the one we had didn't. And so we kept power. So the sump pumps worked and the shop vacs worked. But we need to be thinking about, what happens in a storm that's more like a hurricane or a tropical storm Irene, where you also have wind and you're likely to lose power. So setting up those systems in advance as well.
Yeah, really good point. Being realistic and very good point.
Can I just add that we were in conversations with Plainfield, and they brought up the point of cellular phones, actually, or not radio cell phones, but satellite phones. Having another form of communication beyond when the cell towers go down. You can pick up a satellite phone if you'll remember those big clunky things, but being able to have some form of communication. I'm not sure that's a solution, but
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we've heard people mention sirens and stuff, and there's a real variance of opinion on that one. I will say.
Some of the things that I hear people talking about is sort of one of the elements that we've talked about. For example, knowing what happened to you last time, and then during blue skies times, thinking the next time the water comes, what do I need to do? So that you already know ahead of time, if there's wind, if there's power outage, if there's a forest fire, how am I going to respond to those things? And sort of not just knowing your own, so that the city has a responsibility, volunteer networks will have a responsibility, but each resident and each business owner will have in some way their own responsibility to know what you individually are going to need to do. And then once networks are in place, be able to communicate that ahead of time. For example, if on December 18th, was it, when that had happened, if we had already known from previous time, because we had had the perfect situation and enough time to prepare, which we didn't, but for example, that, oh, this business needs this many people to get stuff out of the basement, these businesses, this is what we need. Then when there's a flood of volunteers, there's already, the volunteer hub already knows these things. For example, all right, you take 2 people to Botanica, 3 people to Anna, 4 people go to Julio's or what have you. And similarly, with various neighborhoods, that type of pre-planning work during Blue Skies and then working on the exercises in between allows us to kind of be prepared when it happens. It's going to take a lot of research development, implementation, and then keeping it alive, because what happens to these types of plans in a lot of areas is you go years without something, and then by the time it happens, everybody who was experienced from last time has already died or moved away or whatever.
I mean, maybe this is part of your stakeholder analysis, but I'll feel bad if I leave this room and don't say it. The schools should also be involved. You know, when there's any type of, you know, delayed opening or like whatever, they have the technology to send out to every single family in Montpelier and Roxbury. So I just want to make sure that that is part of your, I mean, it might be, but I don't want to assume, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Just as part
Yeah,
of your process.
well, this is why we're having this meeting now. This is all in like the preliminary stages of development. We got our goal, we got our priorities, we want to hear input, and now, you know, going into the actual sort of writing development phase. And again, there will be opportunities for, I love that you're bringing it to life, that example, because that's like the exact point of like, what do we need to do? There are actually checklists, for example, that exist already that we've been looking at developing, maybe like expanding upon for business, for a resident, you know, what are your needs? And I think we can do that back and forth. But I think that's where we are not going to develop this in a closed room. You know, these have to be really responsive to the proper parties, you know. Good point about the school.
Sorry, just
Yeah,
one more.
sure.
I'm thinking, so are you partnering with the Vermont Emergency Management? Because that's, I mean, I'm assuming they, right, the responsibility piece, like I would assume
So
they would take a lead role, but I have no idea.
couple things. We have some folks that are part of emergency management and tangential to them on the commission. So we're in sort of like a real flow of information there. And then 2, we've gotten incredible advisors who have already sort of like just said, here's everything I know, call us anytime, you know what I mean? And they're the ones saying, you know, we have a training that's for, you know, must take for anyone, you know, who's the municipal leaders who are the captains when this something happens. And of course, the folks in city, you know, city government who are those people are very responsive and say, yes, sign us up for the next one. So yes, and the beauty of this is every town has to have one of these in place, and we do have one in place. But it's like the first pass, it's like the continuing operations, right? Like what we've all seen now is it must be so much broader than that to do all the things that sort of Mark and we've been saying, you know, for businesses and residents. So that's the part that is not like mandated, but it's done. Let me just say that it is done. We are not creating this from scratch. You have to have a robust plan like this, and we have templates and advisors who are going to help us.
To speak just a little bit more to that, I mean, in the case of the city, for example, the city has an excellent plan for what the city needs to do to maintain the city's assets, continue the operation so that it's there.
Police, fire, yeah.
But it also cannot be our firefighters and police who come respond to the flood needs, in my personal opinion, because who's going to respond to a fire when all the firemen are mucking out basements? Who's going to, you know, we need police and fire to be there to do the work of police and fire departments. But there have been, so the city has a good plan. It's just limited in scope and doesn't include what are we going to do at your house when it's full of water, right? So there are other communities in Vermont. Bethel is one example that has a very robust plan. They unfortunately kind of let their plan die. But at its inception, it was a really good plan and sort of laid out the volunteer networks will do this. Individual residents and businesses will be responsible for doing this. The government will be responsible for doing these things. And so we're using that as it's not a jumping off point, but it's a great reference point for us.
Yes.
We're gonna build off of that.
Sure.
No, go for it.
I was just gonna say, you know, the other thing that we could think about is, you know, sister communities that maybe are like in this last flooding event that we had. Not every, like Addison County wasn't hit in the July floods. Well, if you have a sister community in Addison County, then you could get equipment from, or get supplies from, or fans, or whatever it is, it's not always gonna work that way.
Sure.
Because it might be a snowstorm that impacts the entire city, or it could be a flood that's very isolated, but like, I think it begs us to kind of think about that a little bit, because there's certainly a lot of, even across state borders into, New Hampshire, into New York, where you might be able to build those relationships a bit, so if you have an emergency, they can be at least aware and supportive, and you have that connection.
That's a great idea. I love that idea. Thank you.
I do keep thinking, when I see the footage of what happened in Maine recently, I keep feeling like if we were 3 years down, we would be in such a much better position to sort of offer them our experience and our tools, but we're still working it out at this point.
And we're actually thinking about the creation of this robust sort of, LEOP, the emergency operations plan, as potentially a template that could be fillable PDF for every town in Vermont, because we do feel like we've got the energy, we've got this commission, and every town needs one of these, and very few actually have them as big as we're thinking about this one. So we really actually would love to accelerate progress elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has there been discussion about how to keep the momentum going? I mean, assume the next flood isn't for 10 years.
Yeah.
We all have a short memory.
Yes.
And everybody's going to disperse, and nobody's going to be here. So how do we keep this going so that there's always somebody that's prepared, or somebody with institutional knowledge that knows what to do?
It's a great question. And the answer is no, we're not, because you're not going to let us do that, and we're not going to let us do that. I mean, that's a very pie in the sky kind of notion, but it has to be written into the thing of what is the schedule and who are the players that need to come together every 6 months, every 12 months, what have you, rain or shine, do tabletop exercises, do broader live exercises, or what have you.
And one cool thing that we've been learning as we're getting to know this language and this plan and what it is all about is that it's like really in an emergency, you need the captain and the deputy, right? And they don't need to be specific humans. They don't even need to be specific positions. It's actually more about the personality. Like, is this a good manager under stress, almost a choreographer? And so you can sort of write that into this emergency operations like plan, and then, center, and that those people could be even changing depending on, turnover and other things. But to Mark's point is you have to have a practice schedule, and you have to keep to it, because again, this isn't just for floods, this could be for anything. So that's one very mechanical, I think, answer to your question. As far as momentum, I spent a lot of time thinking about that bigger picture question. How do we really get consensus and rally our community together around making big possible changes here that are really going to make us more resilient, more, flood ready for the next time, probably even more in the watershed adaptive downtown groups, big projects maybe that we've not been able to move to completion, yet they've been in every plan for the last 35 years. Why? And that's a big part of this commission, is understanding where did it get stuck and can we unstick it? And I believe your point about keeping momentum and energy is the only way we're going to really make major change that could really truly make us more resilient. And public education is a big part of that. I think we're seeing is a lot of these projects are related to flood mitigation, and no one's connected those dots. It's like we've been able to move X forward. If we come together and say, you know what, that saves this many feet of flood, storage next time around, which means this many millions of dollars in sort of like savings and heartbreak, and really tell that story and connect these dots. We have a moment now that I think we have to take advantage of to make systemic changes that will last, on their own. So anyway, that's just a more philosophical, I think, response to you, because the public education piece of this, I think, is going to be critical, and you'll see that in the next year as this all rolls out.
Just a 2-minute heads up, I'm going to ring the bells in a couple of minutes.
Bellman, okay, thank you.
I just want to ask if you've looked into the incident command system at all, because the structure you were just describing with people stepping into those roles, that is the incident command system.
Absolutely. And actually, I happen to personally have had some experience post-Irene in government, and the VTrans Incident Command Centers was sort of like what made that response happen. And I just talked to Scott Rogers, who actually works in National Life now, who's just like, doesn't live in Montpelier, but said, put me in, coach. I'm ready to advise you all any way you want. I want to see this succeed. And he was in charge of those incident command centers. So just to show you a little bit of like the behind under the hood, what we're doing in the commission, who we're talking to. And it's amazing who's coming out to say, I want to help however I can. And it's that sort of expertise that's just been invaluable. Thank you. Did I have question over here? Comment? No? If not, Adrian, go for it.
I wanted to respond to this gentleman's, I think sustainability is like should be actually at the forefront. So to answer that, you should be able to answer that first and thinking about where this lives and how do you put it into policy so that it's held accountable over the long term. So, I mean, is it a part of the city structure, like this plan, like where did, like this should be part of your planning right now? Because this needs to have a home.
Yes.
So who is gonna own it? I think it should be a big P. I think it should be part of a policy that is held accountable, that is required to have those 2 annual, whatever, but I don't know if it lives in the commission. I don't know where it lives, but I think the part of this process is, that should really be like on the top.
Yeah.
Rather than like going to do all this stuff, like where is it going to live and who is going to own this? Because it could just die. I've seen programs like this die and it's terrible.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I just wanted to speak to that for a second. The commission isn't meant, as you heard Ben sort of say, is not meant to be necessarily a permanent structure, but we're more like a catalyst or an incubator. And so the example of this plan, the reason why I love this one is like, this is a little bit less tricky because it's super concrete. There is literally a plan that will be a product, and then we will have an exercise. And this one is more straightforward. It really needs to be embedded in the mechanics of city government. And that's where it's supposed to live. That's where it's supposed to live by like law through, emergency management. And that's why the first conversation we had was with the city. And I just want to say again, like it was an incredible conversation because they said, thank you. Yes, we know we need this and we really appreciate the capacity. We have so much to do. We would love to spend all of our energy on this and we just simply cannot, right? So I think they really see us as partners, bless you, it's sort of added capacity, but we got that buy-in early so that because we said, let's just, no assumptions here. We're not gonna go help you write this big plan and get all these, consultants in if it's not gonna become embedded. And, let's just make sure we're not mincing words from day one and really, we're all on the same page about that. But it's a very good high-level point. I believe every project this commission touches that you'll hear in all these different groups, they're gonna have different answers about where they live, what's the long-term sustainability plan. You rang the bell. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. This is just the beginning. Thanks. Keep it coming.